welcome. Take a breath, not to prepare for drama, but to make room for stillness. This is the kind of story that doesn't shout. It sits quietly in the corner of a man's life, where most people never look. But maybe, just maybe, you'll recognize a piece of yourself here. Let's begin. He left the house at 7:40 a.m., same as always. Shirt pressed, shoes polished, messenger bag over one shoulder. The early light stretched long shadows across the sidewalk as he walked to the station, nodding to familiar strangers he never really spoke to. He boarded the same train, 3 stops, then exited and walked 5 more blocks. Not to the office, not anymore. His destination was a quiet bench in the park, tucked beneath a cluster of trees that filtered the sunlight like a curtain. That's where he sat, at 8:17 a.m. sharp, the same time his meetings used to begin. That bench had become his desk. The birds overhead his only co-workers. Sometimes a squirrel darted past with more purpose than he felt. Around him, joggers, retirees, dog walkers, all people with rhythms. He felt like an echo, out of sync with everything. 2 months ago, he was let go. Restructuring, they called it. Downsizing. Nothing personal. But it felt personal. He remembered standing in the HR office with a cheap cardboard box in his hands, nodding silently while someone thanked him for his years of service, with eyes that wouldn't quite meet his. He had driven around the city that day, not ready to go home, not ready to speak. Eventually, he pulled over near a bridge and just sat in the car, engine running, radio off, his thoughts heavier than the silence. When he finally returned home, he said the meeting ran late. She smiled and asked if he wanted spaghetti or rice for dinner. He chose rice. And just like that, the lie took root. Every weekday since, he performed a quiet play. Left the house in his usual clothes, rode the usual train, and took a seat on that same bench. He would sit for hours, doing nothing, thinking everything. He tried to read once, but the words wouldn't stay. Sometimes he closed his eyes and imagined telling her. But every version ended with her looking at him differently, with disappointment or pity or, worse, understanding. So he said nothing. He let her believe he was still the man with the steady job and the steady smile. At lunch, he bought a sandwich from a vendor near the lake, always turkey on rye, always the same vendor who never made eye contact. At 5:20, he boarded the train home. At 5:47, he walked through the front door. She would be stirring something on the stove or helping their daughter with homework. "How was your day?" she'd ask. "Busy," he'd say. And the routine would continue. On rainy days, he still went, sat on that bench, soaked, his coat clinging to him like a second skin. Once, an older man passed by, nodded, and said, "Tough morning, huh?" He nodded back but said nothing. It was the closest thing to connection he'd had in weeks. He started to dread the weekends. They asked more of him, more interaction, more presence, more pretending. He began to fear casual conversations. Neighbors asking about work, her friends mentioning promotions, even his daughter asking what he did at the office. He gave vague answers, played it safe, smiled too much. Some nights, he stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering if she noticed how hollow his eyes had become. One evening, she found a company ID card in his pants pocket while doing laundry. He had forgotten it was there. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. "Why is this still here?" she asked. "I thought you used your phone now." He opened his mouth, closed it, sat down. He told her, all of it. Not in perfect order, not with clarity, but with honesty. Her eyes didn't narrow. Her shoulders didn't tense. She just sat beside him, took his hand, and listened. When he said he didn't want her to see him differently, She said maybe it's time he saw himself differently. They didn't fix everything in that moment, but something shifted. The weight wasn't gone, but it wasn't his alone anymore. He still goes to the park sometimes, but not to hide. Now it's part of his routine, a space to breathe, to rebuild. He picked up a part-time job at a local bookstore. It's not a career, it's not a comeback, but it's real. He hands people stories and smiles, and sometimes they smile back. It's not the life he planned, but maybe it's the life that sees him more clearly than the old one ever did. Come in, gently. This story belongs to a man who doesn't speak much anymore. Not because he has nothing to say, but because no one is really listening. Sometimes, silence becomes the language of fathers. And this is one of those quiet stories. Let it unfold slowly. He checked the phone again, not because it had rung, but because he still hoped it might. It sat on the small table by the window, screen smudged, sound on. He never turned the sound off, not anymore. He used to keep it silent so it wouldn't disturb his naps. But these days, sleep came too easily and too often, and no one called during naps anyway. He lived in a small apartment now. Not the house he built with his hands and dreams many years ago. That one had too many stairs, too much dust, too many rooms filled with memories that echoed too loud. So he moved to this place with its one bedroom, single burner stove, and a balcony just big enough for a chair and a dying potted plant. The mornings were quiet. The afternoons were quieter. And the nights stretched long like hallways with no doors. His days began with tea. Not because he liked tea, but because it gave him something to do. Boil water, drop the bag, watch it swirl, hold the warmth. He didn't use sugar anymore. The doctor had warned him. He didn't argue. He just adjusted, like he always had. The wall in front of him held 3 photos. One of his wedding day, his hair thick and black, eyes full of defiance. One of his wife, now gone, laughing in a field of wildflowers. And one of his son, the most recent, in a suit and tie at some graduation. He hadn't printed new ones since then. Not because he didn't want to, just because no one had sent him any. Sometimes he picked up the photo of his son and tried to remember the last time they spoke on the phone. It was 2 months ago, a quick call, full of good intentions and tired voices. "I've been meaning to call more, Dad, just been crazy busy." "I know, son, don't worry. Take care." That was it. The next week passed with silence, then another and another. He didn't want to seem needy. He never was. Not when his son was young and cried in the night. Not when bills were due and overtime shifts stacked up. Not when his wife got sick and he held her hand through chemo and fevers and prayers that sometimes felt ignored. He had carried everyone else's weight. That was what a man did. Or so he believed. But now, there was no one left to carry. Just the weight of waiting. He often walked to the mailbox with a small flutter of hope. Maybe a card, a note. Even junk mail addressed to him felt like recognition. But most days the box was empty, or worse, full of bills and offers he didn't ask for. Sometimes the neighbor's kids said hi, sometimes not. He didn't blame them. The world belonged to the busy now, and he had nothing to trade for their time. He had grown up in a world where love was proven by work, not words. Where men were expected to build, protect, provide. He had done that. And still, the silence came. He wondered if he had made it too easy for them to forget him. Maybe he should have been louder, needier. But that wasn't him. That had never been him. One afternoon, it rained. The kind of soft, steady rain that seemed to blur the edges of everything. He sat by the window and stared out at the wet pavement, watching reflections shift and slide. He thought about calling his son. The number was still there, starred in his contacts. He stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Then he set the phone down. What would I say, he thought. Just checking in. Just reminding you I exist. Just needing to hear a voice that once called me Daddy with laughter in it. He made more tea, watched the bag swirl again, thought about the day his son moved out. They had argued about something stupid, college versus trade school, the need to follow your own path. It ended with silence. Eventually, the boy left, and the silence stayed. Years passed. They reconnected in surface ways, holidays, formal smiles. But the space between them grew vines, and neither reached to clear them. When his wife died, his son came, stayed for 3 days. They cried together once, hugged stiffly. Then the boy left again, and the apartment swallowed its breath once more. Now, at 72, he found himself rehearsing conversations in his mind, practicing the simple lines. How are you, son? How is work? Are you eating well? But they all felt hollow without someone to hear them. One evening, he fell asleep in the chair. The TV hummed low static. The tea had gone cold. A dream came, not vivid, but warm. His son was 5 again, running in the backyard with a stick for a sword, calling out, "Look, Dad, I'm the king." He had laughed then, a full, proud laugh. When he woke, his cheeks were wet. Not from the rain this time, just water he hadn't shed in years. The phone sat quietly on the table. He didn't check it. He just stared. One ring. Just one, he whispered inside himself. A few days later, it did ring. At 10:43 p.m., startled, he fumbled to answer. The voice was rushed, apologetic. "Sorry, Dad. I meant to call sooner. Things have been..." He didn't let him finish. "It's good to hear you, son." That's all he said. And that was enough. That night, he didn't sleep in the chair. He slept in his bed, deep and warm. The phone stayed on the nightstand, screen up, sound on. Some men speak with silence. Some cry only behind closed doors. And some, like the man in this story, carry everything on their back until one soft presence reminds them they're still human. You don't need to understand all of it. You only need to feel it. Let's begin. He always said he wasn't the kind of man who cried. Not at funerals, not at weddings, not even when his father died suddenly over a cracked steering wheel on a cold February morning. That was the rule. Passed down like an old tool. Men carry, they don't crumble. And for most of his life, he believed it. His face was a well-kept wall. His voice stayed steady, even when the world shook. People came to him for calm, for strength, for certainty. He gave it freely, even when he had none for himself. The only place that wall ever showed a crack was on the worn leather couch in his living room just after midnight, when everyone else had gone to sleep. That's when it would come. The ache. The chest tight like a vice. The feeling he couldn't name, only endure. And always, beside him, there was her. Not a woman, not a friend. A dog, Olive. A muddy, aging golden retriever with soft eyes and a slower walk each year. She never asked him for answers, never judged the silence, never minded the tears that sometimes fell, one by one, down the side of his nose when he leaned back in the dark, breathing like someone trying not to drown. She would simply lay her head on his knee and stay. He got her 10 years ago, the week after the divorce papers were finalized. He told people she was a good distraction. Truth was, she was the only living thing in the house that didn't make him feel like a failure. His friends stopped calling as much. His mother said, "Maybe if you had listened more." His own voice betrayed him in court. But Olive, she never left. When he came home from work, tired and braced for silence, she greeted him like he was still someone worth waiting for. She aged like he did. Slower mornings, a little more limping. He started working more from home, said it was about flexibility. But really, he just didn't want to leave her alone for too long. She had become a part of the house, like the light switch near the front door or the quiet ticking of the old wall clock. There were days he didn't speak to a single human being. But when she was there, breathing softly on the floor, he didn't feel alone. On good days, they took short walks around the block. On bad days, she laid beside his desk, her tail thumping once when he looked her way. Sometimes he talked to her. Nothing profound, just little murmurs, half-formed thoughts. "I'm tired today. I miss them. I wish things had gone different." She never flinched, never offered advice, just looked at him with those round, patient eyes, like maybe she saw him better than anyone else ever had. One night, after a long week that ended in another project delay, another missed dinner with his daughter, another argument with himself about whether anything was really changing, he sat on the couch and cried. Not a few silent tears this time, but the kind of crying that shook his shoulders and made his chest hurt. And Olive, even in her slower, stiffer body, pulled herself up and climbed onto the couch, pressed her weight into his side, and laid there until he ran out of sorrow. She fell asleep that way, curled into the quietest part of him. A few weeks later, she stopped eating. The vet said it might be time. He nodded like he understood, but he didn't. How do you prepare to lose the only witness to your unspoken grief? The only one who saw all the parts of you never dared show. On her final morning, he carried her into the car with shaking arms. She didn't fight, didn't whimper, just looked up at him, tired but trusting. In the small room at the back of the clinic, he whispered words he'd never said out loud. "I'm not okay. I don't want to be alone. Thank you for staying." He held her until her chest stopped moving. Then he sat there for a long time after, hands still resting on her head, the way he used to when the nights got heavy. The apartment feels different now. Too still. Too clean. He still forgets sometimes, reaches for the leash, looks for her shadow. But the couch remains, and sometimes, late at night, he still sits there and talks softly into the dark. The tears come slower now, but they still come. And even though she's gone, he swears the room doesn't feel completely empty. Like maybe part of her stayed. Like maybe the space where he fell apart is still held together by memory. The kind that doesn't need to bark or wag to be real. Just be there. Not all heartbreak shatters the world. Some just settle in the chest, like dust you can't quite sweep out. This is the story of a man who watched the love of his life begin again, and still chose to be there. If your heart feels quiet tonight, stay with this one. Let it move as slowly as it needs. He hadn't planned on going. He told himself it was too strange, too unnecessary. But the invitation sat on his kitchen counter for weeks, and every time he passed it, something in him paused. She had sent it with a handwritten note, brief, polite, kind. "I understand if you can't make it, but I'd like you to come." He stared at those words more times than he could count. Not for what they said, but for what they didn't. He still remembered the day she left. No slammed doors, no shouting, just two people sitting across a table realizing they were speaking two different languages. He had thought love was loyalty, provision, silence, when silence made things easier. She had wanted to be seen, heard, fought for. He gave her calm. She needed fire. And when she walked out with a small suitcase and tired eyes, he didn't stop her. He thought giving her space was respect. It took him years to understand that sometimes holding on is the braver thing. The wedding was small. A garden behind a modest hall, strings of soft lights woven through the trees, the scent of cut grass and warm wine in the air. He stood near the back, away from the folding chairs, wearing the same suit he wore the day they signed their divorce papers. He wondered if anyone would notice. No one did. Her new husband stood tall, smiling the way he used to when she walked into a room. She looked beautiful. Not just in the way people do on weddings, but in that settled, exhaled way. Like she had finally come home to herself. He didn't cry. He didn't smile either. He just watched. Still. Steady, quiet. During the vows, he closed his eyes for a moment and let the wind move through him. He caught fragments. Promise, future, trust, joy. Words he once used too, words he once meant. After the ceremony, they served champagne and finger food. He avoided the crowd, found a tree, leaned on it. Then he heard her voice. Familiar, warm, a little surprised. You came. He turned, nodded, said something vague. Congratulations. You look happy. She smiled in that soft way that used to make him forget whatever had gone wrong in his day. They didn't say much, just stood there in a kind silence. Eventually, her new husband came over, shook his hand, thanked him for being there. He meant it. That made it harder somehow. A younger cousin tapped a glass and asked for toasts. People laughed, raised flutes, shared stories. Someone nudged him. Say something. You knew her longest? He almost said no, almost excused himself. But then he stood, cleared his throat, and in the quiet that followed, he told a simple story. Not about the end, but the beginning. About the girl who once danced in the kitchen while burning toast. About the way she laughed when nervous, like hiccups wrapped in a smile. About how loving her taught him things he didn't understand until much later. He didn't say it to make anyone uncomfortable. He said it to honor something real. Not all love ends in forever. But some loves still deserve a goodbye that doesn't taste like bitterness. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then, soft clapping. A few tearful smiles. Her most of all. She mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded. The rest of the evening passed like fog. He left early, walked to the train station instead of driving, sat by the window as streetlights flickered past, hands resting on his knees like he was afraid of what they'd do if left untethered. At home, he took off the suit slowly, hung it back in the same place. The apartment smelled like old coffee and rain. He poured a glass of water, sat at the edge of his bed, and let himself feel everything at once. Regret, gratitude, longing, peace. Not a storm, not a breakdown. Just a man sitting with the shape of something that used to be. That night, he slept through. No dreams. Just rest. And in the morning, for the first time in a long while, he opened the curtains wide and let the light in. This story isn't about losing a job. It's about losing a place where your name meant something, where your rhythm set the pace. Now, that rhythm is gone, replaced by newer voices, quicker keystrokes, and laughter that no longer turns your way. Let's sit beside the man who stayed just long enough to feel himself disappear. He arrived before the lights came on. Always had. Years ago, when the office was smaller, colder, younger, he was the first one through the door and the last one to leave. People used to notice, used to nod, thank him, ask for his thoughts. He used to lead the morning check-ins, used to draw diagrams on whiteboards with smudged sleeves and confident lines. He used to matter. Now, the whiteboard stayed clean. The diagrams came from slide decks made by people with better fonts and faster voices. His seat was still there, back corner by the window, same coffee mug with the chipped rim. But the conversations began to flow around him like a stream around a stone. The younger team called him Sir. They meant it as respect, but it landed like distance, like a label for something fading. He still did his work, on time, accurate, reliable. But the projects got smaller, the meetings fewer, the eye contact brief. He told himself he didn't mind, that he liked the quiet. But some days he stared at his screen so long it blurred, and he wondered when the world had shifted without telling him. He used to stay late to finish things. Now he stayed late because it was the only time the silence felt like his again, not like exile, just space. He used to joke with the interns. Now they laughed together in clusters he wasn't part of, referencing shows he hadn't seen, slang he didn't catch. When they needed advice, they went to each other. When they succeeded, they posted about it. When they struggled, they powered through. No one asked him anymore how he would have handled it back in the day. He noticed. He always noticed. On his birthday, someone brought cupcakes, a polite gesture. The card had his name, misspelled. He smiled, said thank you, and threw away the frosting when no one was looking. He never liked sweet things much. At home, his wife asked how work was. He said it was fine. It was always fine. The kind of fine that builds a little ache behind the ribs. The kind that makes sleep shallow and morning slower. One afternoon, a meeting began without him. He wasn't invited. The project had shifted, they said. He wasn't needed on this phase. He nodded, said he understood, sat back down at his desk and opened a spreadsheet he didn't need to edit. Just stared at the cells, watched the cursor blink. That blinking felt like mockery, like a rhythm that waited for him to press a key he no longer knew how to use. His manager, a good kid, sharp, fast-talking, stopped by to say they were restructuring some roles. Nothing bad, just evolving. He nodded again, said he was happy to help however he could. Meant it, mostly. But inside, something sagged, a rope loosening. That night, he walked past the mirrors in his hallway and caught a glimpse of himself. Not old, but older. Not weak, but wearier. Like someone who had been standing in a crowd for hours, waving, and no one waved back. He remembered being the new guy once, hungry, eager, full of ideas that didn't quite work, but got better because someone gave him space to fail. He remembered who gave him that space, and now he wondered who he had become. A placeholder, a name on an org chart waiting to fade. One Friday, an intern asked if he'd always been in that seat. He smiled, said yes. Thought about how many people had come and gone while he stayed, how many welcomes and farewells he had witnessed. And yet, no one remembered his arrival. No one would mark his exit. When he finally submitted his notice, 2 sentences long, his manager looked surprised. We didn't see this coming. He just smiled, said it was time. The last day came without a cake, without a speech, a few handshakes, a few quiet thanks. He walked out with no box, no folders, no weight. Just the click of the glass door behind him and the hollow space of a desk already assigned to someone new. At home, he sat at the kitchen table and looked at his hands. Same hands that used to hold blueprints, cables, wires, meetings. Now they sat still, steady, uncertain. He didn't feel angry, just misplaced, like a bookmark in a story that no longer needed reading. But somewhere inside that silence, a thought surfaced. Maybe it was finally time to write something new. He didn't ask for much. just a home, a future for his children, a place where his accent wouldn't always be the loudest thing in the room. This is not the story of struggle. It is the story of what's left after struggle is no longer needed. When a man becomes invisible in the house he built. Listen gently. His words may be broken, but his heart never was. He used to wake up before the sun, 5 a.m., always. He didn't need an alarm, his body remembered. Back in the old country, mornings smelled like coal and wet earth. Here, they smelled like coffee and bus fumes. But work was work, and a man's job was to bring home enough so that his children wouldn't have to carry the same burdens. That was the dream. That was the promise. So he carried crates, scrubbed kitchens, stacked boxes, drove delivery vans through cities that didn't know how to pronounce his name. His knees cracked with every step by the time he hit 50. But he never stopped. Not when he was sick, not when it snowed, not when his hands bled. Every dollar folded into school supplies, rent, new shoes. He didn't buy new shirts, didn't go on vacation. His reward was watching his children rise, fluent in a language he still stumbled through. Wearing clothes he could never afford, talking fast, dreaming faster. He was proud. He was also tired. The house was paid off. The kids went to college. His wife no longer had to clean other people's houses. It should have been the good part, the soft landing. But somehow, he had never felt further from them. At dinner, they spoke too fast, laughed at jokes from shows he didn't understand. When he asked them to repeat, they sighed. When he mispronounced words, they corrected him with embarrassment, not kindness. When he shared stories from the past, they scrolled their phones and nodded without hearing. His daughter once said, "Dad, you don't need to worry about these things anymore. Just relax. You've done enough." He nodded, smiled. But inside, the words stung. Because what he heard wasn't praise, it was dismissal. It was code for, "You are no longer useful." He didn't want applause. He just wanted presence. To be asked what he thought. To be looked in the eye, not over the shoulder. He learned how to disappear slowly, spoke less, ate quietly, washed dishes before being asked, stood in doorways during conversations like a ghost waiting for permission to speak. He watched his children become strangers in his own house, saw their eyes glaze over when he entered the room, heard them say things like, "He's just old-fashioned," saw the way they looked at his clothes, his food, his hands. One evening, his son told a friend on the phone, "My dad's kind of stuck in the past. He didn't mean it with anger, but he didn't mean it with love either." That night, the old man sat in the garage for a long time. Not angry, not hurt, just hollow. He looked at the toolbox he hadn't touched in months, at the bike he once repaired over and over again, just to keep his son from walking to school. He ran his hand over the metal and remembered how it felt to be needed. The next morning, he made breakfast, the kind he used to make back home. Warm, fragrant, full of memories. No one ate it. They had meetings. They grabbed bars and left quickly. He sat alone, bowl untouched, steam fading like breath in winter. He wanted to say, "I crossed oceans for you. I buried my language so you could speak yours freely. I worked double shifts while coughing blood and still smiled at your birthdays. I don't need you to worship me. I just need to know you see me." But the words stayed inside. They would come out wrong anyway. That Sunday, he walked to the park alone, sat on a bench, watched families laugh in accents of every kind. He saw another old man playing chess with his grandson, heard a father teaching a little girl how to throw a baseball. It hit him, sharp and sudden, that perhaps he had succeeded too well in making life easy. That maybe in shielding his children from his struggle, he had erased his story. He stayed until the light changed, until the birds quieted, until the ache inside settled into something more still. When he returned home, no one asked where he had been, and he didn't offer. He went to his room, folded his work jacket neatly, opened the window, let in the air of a country he had given everything to, and that still didn't quite feel like his. Then he sat down, picked up a pen, and began to write a letter. Not to complain, not to accuse, but to remind his children where they came from, and who paid the toll to get them there. Some burdens are not carried with noise. Some men hold the world together with quiet hands, and no one ever stops to see the weight pressing on their shoulders. This story is about a man who gave everything without ever being asked how much it cost him. Sit gently. There's weariness in this silence. He didn't mind being the one who woke up first. The alarm rang at 5:10 a.m., always. Before the sun, before the traffic, before anyone else opened their eyes. The house was quiet then. The kind of quiet that feels like duty, not peace. He made the coffee, took a quick shower, ironed his shirt if needed. Then he sat for 6 minutes. Only 6, never more. Just to breathe before the rest of the day swallowed him whole. He drove the kids to school, answered work emails in the parking lot, sat through meetings with eyes that stayed sharp even when his mind felt frayed. He remembered birthdays, changed light bulbs, folded laundry when no one was watching, held space for everyone else's meltdowns, but never his own. They called him dependable, a rock, a real man. And for a while he wore those words like armor. But armor gets heavy, and he had been wearing it for too long. No one ever asked if he wanted to, if he was okay, if he ever wanted someone else to carry the groceries, or remember the dentist appointments, or fill the tank before the light turned red. It wasn't that they were ungrateful. They just assumed. He made it look easy. That was the trick. That was the trap. He was the last to sit down at dinner and the first to get up. The one who smiled in family photos while his jaw was clenched tight from unpaid bills and deadlines. He cracked jokes at gatherings, poured drinks for others, checked in with friends who hadn't called in months. He was everyone's safety net. But no one noticed the fraying edges. At work he covered for sick colleagues, stayed late, volunteered for the hard projects. They praised him in meetings, sent thumbs-up emojis. But when he broke down in the bathroom stall once, shaking quietly so no one would hear, there was no follow-up. No how are you holding up. At home, he was the strong one. The driver, the fixer, the planner. On nights when he couldn't sleep, he stared at the ceiling and imagined what it would feel like to be held, not physically, but emotionally. For someone to say, "You don't have to be the one holding it all together tonight. You can fall apart here." But that offer never came. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, washing dishes, and replying to a late email from his boss, he stood in the kitchen and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It sounded like a sigh, but it felt like a collapse. His wife walked in, scrolled her phone, kissed him on the cheek, asked what time he was setting the alarm for. He said, "The usual." She nodded, said goodnight. He wanted to say something, anything. "I'm tired. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." But the words died on his tongue. He just smiled, said sleep well. Then he sat back down at the table, alone, the dishes clean but the air heavy. The next morning, he woke at 5:10. Same routine, same rhythm. But as he looked in the mirror, toothbrush in hand, he studied the man staring back. Not broken, just fading. That evening, he did something different. He wrote a note, not a dramatic letter, Just a few sentences on a scrap of paper. I'm trying, I'm tired. I don't need fixing, I just want to be seen. He left it on the nightstand, went to bed, closed his eyes, listened to the stillness of a house he kept standing, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone would finally ask, "Are you okay?" Sometimes, we carry silence for so long that we forget what it feels like to be heard. This story ends not with resolution, but with recognition. A single light turned on in a dark hallway. Come closer. One more time. He never expected much from his birthday. Not anymore. The cake had stopped coming after 70. The calls grew shorter. The texts became the only reminders that someone remembered the date. But this year, he didn't even get that. No ringtone. No message tone. Just a quiet house, a lukewarm cup of tea, and a weather forecast he didn't really care about. He spent the morning trimming the plants on his windowsill. Though one of them had died 2 weeks ago, and he hadn't had the heart to throw it out. He watched the street below from his balcony. Same people walking the same dogs, cars passing like they had somewhere important to be. He used to have somewhere to be too. He used to wake up early and leave before the sky turned blue. He used to come home tired but full, with the smell of dust and oil on his hands. His son hated that smell, always wrinkled his nose, asked why everything Dad touched looked old. The boy liked clean things, fast things, bright rooms. They were different. Grew apart slowly, like pages in a book read once and closed too soon. When the boy moved out, they spoke less. Messages turned into months. The last call was in winter. "I'm busy, Dad. Work's been intense. We'll catch up soon," but soon never landed. On this birthday, he didn't even check the phone after 3 p.m. The silence said enough. He made himself soup, though he wasn't hungry, turned on the TV, but didn't watch. He just sat with the flickering light in the room, not really thinking, not really feeling. Around 8:30, there was a knock at the door. Slow, uncertain. He opened it and froze. It was him. The boy, taller now, thinner, eyes with dark circles and a kind of guilt you can't fake. In his hands, a small brown paper bag. He didn't say much, just came in, placed the bag on the counter, said he had passed by a bakery and thought of that sweet bread his dad used to like, the one with raisins and orange peel. He remembered. That was what struck hardest. Not the visit, not the food, the remembering. They sat on the couch, awkward at first, then quieter. Then something loosened. The boy asked how he had been, listened when the old man talked about his aching back, his stubborn sink, the pigeon that wouldn't leave his windowsill. There was no grand apology, no long conversation, just presence, enough to soften something inside. Before leaving, the boy took out a small package. 2 batteries. "I remembered you said the remote died." The old man nodded, smiled a little, not because of the gift, but because someone had listened. As the door closed gently behind him, the silence in the house felt different. Not gone, but warmer. That night, the old man placed the sweetbread on a plate, poured a cup of tea, sat by the window. He didn't light a candle, didn't need to. Something was already glowing.